The cold wind swept through the vast green expanse of Rose Hill Cemetery in Chicago as Daniel Parker stood motionless before the freshly carved gravestone. His expensive black coat did little to shield him from the biting chill, but he barely noticed. The weight pressing against his chest was heavier than any storm. The name etched into the marble, Isabella Thompson, felt like a wound that had just been reopened, bleeding with regret and sorrow. She had been gone for a week, and yet, standing here, it still felt unreal. He had attended the funeral, watched her coffin being lowered into the ground, and yet, something in him refused to accept that Isabella, the woman he had once loved with all his heart, was now just a memory. Daniel was not a man who let emotions control him. As the CEO of a successful real estate empire, he had built his fortune on logic, sharp decision-making, and an unshakable will. But today none of that mattered. Today he was just a man who had lost something irreplaceable. Their love had started like a dream in the bustling streets of New York, where they had first met. She was an artist, full of passion, life, and dreams that had no boundaries. He was already on his way to becoming a self-made millionaire, his life dictated by deadlines, deals, and numbers. Despite their differences, they had fallen for each other, a whirlwind romance that had defied logic and reason. But love alone was never enough. Their marriage had suffered under the weight of his ambition. Late nights at the office turned into missed anniversaries. Business meetings replaced weekend getaways. The love that once burned brightly between them dimmed with every broken promise, every unanswered phone call, every lonely night she spent waiting for him to come home. Eventually she stopped waiting. One day she walked out of their shared Manhattan apartment, leaving only a note behind, "I loved you but I couldn't wait forever." That was 5 years ago. He never tried to bring her back. Not because he didn't love her, but because he believed he had already lost her. Now, standing at her grave, the guilt was suffocating. Had she been happy in these years apart? Had she moved on? Had someone else given her the love and attention he failed to provide? He had searched for her once, out of curiosity more than love, but she had disappeared without a trace. And now she was here beneath the earth, taking with her all the unanswered questions he never dared to ask. He crouched down, his fingers brushing against the cold stone. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "For everything." A muffled sob broke through the silence. Daniel stiffened. He wasn't alone. His eyes scanned the cemetery, his sharp instincts kicking in. A few rows away, near Isabella's grave, stood two small figures, children no older than 6 or 7. They were dressed in simple jackets, their heads bowed, tiny shoulders trembling. They were crying. A strange sense of déjà vu gripped him. Something about them, about the way they stood there, felt eerily familiar. He took a hesitant step forward, his shoes crunching against the gravel. The boys didn't notice him, too lost in their sorrow. One of them, the slightly taller one, sniffled loudly and placed a single white flower on the grave. "Mom, we miss you," the boy whispered, his voice barely audible in the wind. Daniel stopped breathing. His heart, which had been numb for years, suddenly began to race. "Mom?" His eyes darted between the gravestone and the children. They were calling Isabella their mother. He felt the world tilt beneath him as he took in their faces, their delicate features. The high cheekbones, the soft curve of their jawlines, the familiar deep brown eyes that mirrored his own reflection. A strange, terrifying thought gripped him. No, it wasn't possible. He took another step closer, and this time the boys heard him. The shorter one gasped and grabbed his brother's hand, both of them turning to face him with wide, frightened eyes. "Who are you?" the older boy asked, his voice cautious yet firm. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came out. His throat had closed up, his mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. These boys, they looked like him. Too much like him for it to be a coincidence. His gaze flickered back to the tombstone, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. Isabella had been pregnant when she left. And she never told him. His knees felt weak as he forced himself to speak. I knew your mother," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. The boys exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from fear to curiosity. The younger one wiped his nose on his sleeve. "Are you Mommy's friend?" he asked, his voice filled with innocence. Daniel's chest tightened. How was he supposed to answer that? He wanted to say yes. He wanted to tell them that he had loved their mother more than anything, that he had once dreamed of a future with her, but life had pulled them apart. He wanted to tell them that he had no idea they existed, that if he had known, nothing in the world would have kept him away from them. But all those words got stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded slowly. The older boy narrowed his eyes. "Why didn't you come to her funeral?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Daniel swallowed hard. He had been at the funeral, standing in the back, watching from a distance. He had felt like an outsider, like someone who had no right to mourn her after abandoning her all those years ago. But now, standing here, looking at these two boys who carried his blood, his DNA, he realized just how much he had lost. A painful silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustling of the wind through the trees. Before he could think of what to say, an elderly woman rushed towards them, her face filled with concern. "Noah, Liam, what did I tell you about talking to strangers?" she scolded gently, wrapping her arms around the boys protectively. Daniel's head snapped up. "Noah, Liam." Their names rang in his ears like an echo from a life he had never known. The boys shrank slightly under the woman's gaze but didn't move away. "He knew Mommy," Noah murmured. The woman's eyes finally met Daniel's, and in that instant he saw the recognition flicker across her face. She knew who he was. More than that, she knew what he was to them. Her expression hardened, her body tensing as if preparing for a battle. "You need to leave," she said firmly. Daniel's jaw clenched. He had spent his entire life negotiating billion-dollar deals, bending powerful men to his will, but in this moment he felt utterly powerless. He wasn't ready to leave. He needed answers. He needed to know his sons. But before he could say another word, the woman turned away, leading the boys toward the exit. He stood there, frozen, as his children disappeared from sight. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Daniel stood motionless in the empty cemetery, his heart pounding as the boys and the elderly woman disappeared through the rusted iron gates of Rose Hill Cemetery. The chilling wind blew against his face, but he barely felt it. His mind was racing, flooded with a million questions, each one more painful than the last. How could Isabella have kept this from him? Why hadn't she told him she was pregnant when she left? Did she hate him that much? Or had she simply believed he wouldn't care? His hands clenched into fists as frustration and regret twisted inside him. For years, he had lived under the assumption that he and Isabella had nothing left between them. But now he knew that wasn't true. She had been carrying his children, his sons, and she never gave him the chance to be their father. His gaze fell back to the grave, the fresh soil covering her coffin still damp from last week's rain. She had taken the truth with her, leaving him in the dark, forcing him to discover the existence of Noah and Liam in the most heartbreaking way possible. He thought about their small faces, the way they clutched each other's hands as they cried at their mother's grave. They had no idea who he was. To them he was just another stranger. A lump formed in his throat. He had spent years building a business empire, sealing billion-dollar deals, climbing to the top of the corporate world. But what had it all been for? He had sacrificed so much, his time, his relationships, his love for Isabella, and for what? To end up standing in a cemetery, realizing too late that he had lost something far more valuable than money. He turned away from the grave, his mind already made up. He needed to find them. He needed to know them. But more than that, he needed them to know him. He strode out of the cemetery, his footsteps heavy against the gravel, and got into his black Mercedes parked outside. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he drove through the streets of Chicago, his thoughts a storm of emotions. He knew he had to find the woman who had taken the boys away. She wasn't their mother, she couldn't be, but she was their guardian. And if she was the one keeping them from him, he needed to know why. The next morning, Daniel sat in his office on the 43rd floor of the Willis Tower, staring at his laptop screen. His assistant, Karen, had always been efficient, and today was no exception. Within hours of his request, she had gathered everything there was to know about Isabella's life after she left him. What he saw made his stomach tighten with guilt. She had moved to Chicago 6 years ago, just a few months after their separation. There was no record of her remarrying, no evidence of another man in her life. She had lived modestly, working as a freelance artist, selling her paintings at small galleries and local art fairs. And then, 4 months ago, she was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. A slow, cruel disease that had taken her life piece by piece while he had been living in his penthouse in Manhattan, oblivious to her suffering. His eyes skimmed through the documents until they landed on the name of her closest contact, Margaret Hayes. The same woman he had seen with the boys at the cemetery. A retired schoolteacher, aged 64, she had lived in Chicago her entire life. The report confirmed what he had already suspected. Margaret had been caring for Noah and Liam since Isabella's passing. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. So, this was the woman standing between him and his children. That evening, Daniel found himself parked in front of a modest brick house in Lincoln Park. The house was small but well-maintained, with flower pots lining the porch and warm yellow lights glowing from the windows. He sat in his car for a long moment, wondering how he was supposed to do this. He had spent his entire life making tough negotiations, convincing investors to trust him with millions of dollars. But this was different. He wasn't just trying to win a deal. He was trying to win back something he had unknowingly lost. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. He knocked twice, the sound echoing through the quiet evening. A few seconds later, the door opened slightly and Margaret's wary eyes met his. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, with a resigned sigh, she opened the door wider and stepped aside. "I figured you'd come," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Come in." He stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the cozy living room. A few framed pictures sat on a wooden table near the couch, photos of Noah and Liam at various ages. His chest tightened. He had missed everything. Their first steps, their first words, their birthdays. He turned back to Margaret, his voice steady but filled with unspoken emotion. "Why didn't she tell me?" Margaret sighed and gestured for him to sit. He hesitated before lowering himself onto the couch. "Because she was afraid," she said softly. "Afraid you were too caught up in your world to care. She loved you, Daniel, but she knew the kind of life you lived. She didn't think you'd want to be a father." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. She didn't think he'd want them? His fingers curled into fists. "That's not fair," he said, his voice rough. "She made that decision for me. She took away my right to know them." Margaret nodded slowly. "Maybe she did. But can you honestly say she was wrong? Where were you all these years, Daniel? Did you ever try to find her? Did you ever wonder if she was okay?" He opened his mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. He had assumed she had moved on, that she had found happiness somewhere else. And he had done nothing to change that assumption. The realization was like a knife to his heart. Margaret studied him for a long moment. "Look," she said finally, her voice softer now. "I don't doubt that you're their father. And I don't doubt that you regret not being there. But those boys? They don't know you. They've just lost their mother. They need stability, not a stranger suddenly claiming to be their dad." Daniel inhaled sharply. "Then let me get to know them." His voice was quieter now, almost pleading. "I don't want to take them away from you, but I want to be in their lives. I need to be in their lives." Margaret sighed, her gaze searching his. "I don't know if that's a good idea." He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "Please," he whispered. "Just give me a chance." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Margaret looked away, exhaling deeply. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's the best I can offer." It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was a start. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Daniel left Margaret's house with a storm of emotions brewing inside him. The night air was cold, the streets of Lincoln Park quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel, his mind replaying every word Margaret had said. She had agreed to think about letting him see Noah and Liam, but what did that really mean? Would she ever truly trust him enough? He couldn't blame her for being cautious. He was a stranger to them. A man who had unknowingly abandoned his own children. His stomach twisted at the thought. How many times had Isabella watched their sons grow, knowing that their father had no idea they even existed? Did she ever try to reach out only to stop herself? Or had she been too convinced that he wouldn't care? The more he thought about it, the heavier the guilt became. The next morning, Daniel found himself back at work, but his usual focus was gone. The financial reports, the pending mergers, none of it seemed to matter anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't consumed by the empire he had built. Instead, he was consumed by the thought of two little boys who shared his blood but not his life. He tried to imagine them in their daily routine. Did they have a favorite TV show? What kind of toys did they play with? Were they picky eaters like he had been as a kid? The questions were endless, and the fact that he had no answers made him feel like an outsider in his own family. By midday he couldn't take it anymore. He picked up his phone and dialed Margaret's number. She answered after the third ring, her voice wary. "Daniel. I need to see them," he said without hesitation. "I don't care how. I just need a chance." There was silence on the other end, and for a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she let out a sigh. "They don't know about you," she said. "I can't just tell them overnight that they have a father they never met." "I understand," he said quickly. "But let me be around. Even if I have to be introduced as a friend at first. I just want to know them." Another pause. Then, to his surprise, Margaret said, Meet us at the park tomorrow afternoon. Millennium Park by the Cloud Gate. We go there often. His breath caught. This was it. His chance. Thank you, he said, the words barely enough to express what he felt. The next day Daniel arrived early, dressed in casual jeans and a sweater, an unusual sight for a man always in tailored suits. He stood near the massive silver structure known as the Bean, scanning the crowd. When he finally spotted them, his heart pounded. Noah and Liam were running ahead, their little faces filled with excitement. They looked so much like Isabella. Their dark hair, the way they moved, it was all her. Margaret walked behind them, keeping a close watch, but when she saw him, she gave a small nod, acknowledging his presence. Daniel forced himself to stay calm as he approached. The boys were tossing a small football between them, laughing as they played. When the ball rolled toward him, he instinctively picked it up. Liam, the smaller of the two, ran over. Thanks, he said cheerfully, taking the ball from his hands. Daniel smiled, his chest tightening. You've got a good throw, he said casually. Liam grinned. Noah's better. He throws it really far. Daniel glanced at Noah, who was watching cautiously from a few feet away. There was curiosity in his eyes, but also hesitation. He knew this was the moment to tread carefully. You both look like future quarterbacks, he said lightly. Mind if I play for a bit? Liam nodded enthusiastically, and after a brief hesitation, Noah shrugged. Sure, I guess. For the next half hour, Daniel played catch with them, laughing as they ran circles around him. It was surreal. These were his sons, and yet they had no idea. Margaret watched from a bench nearby, her expression unreadable. After a while, the boys grew tired and plopped onto the grass. Daniel sat beside them, still catching his breath. So, do you guys come here a lot? He asked. Yeah, Noah said, wiping sweat from his forehead. Mom used to bring us here. She said it was her favorite place in the city. Daniel's throat tightened. Isabella had brought them here. The thought made his chest ache. She had good taste, he said softly. Liam looked up at him. Are you friends with Grandma? He hesitated, then glanced at Margaret, who was listening closely. Something like that, he said carefully. I knew your mom a long time ago. Noah narrowed his eyes. Really? Daniel nodded, his heart pounding. Yeah. She was amazing. A silence stretched between them before Noah said quietly, I miss her. Daniel's heart broke. He wanted to pull them both into his arms and tell them the truth, tell them that he missed her too, that they weren't alone. But it was too soon. He had to earn their trust first. She loved you both very much, he said instead. Liam sighed, playing with the grass. Yeah. She used to tell us stories at bedtime. I wish she was still here. Daniel swallowed hard. He couldn't change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could be there for them now. As the sun began to set, Margaret stood up. Time to go, boys. They groaned in protest, but eventually they got up. Liam turned to Daniel. Are you coming again? Daniel looked at Margaret, his heart in his throat. She studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod. We'll see, she said. It wasn't a promise, but it was something. As Daniel watched them walk away, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to give up. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Daniel couldn't stop thinking about the boys after their meeting at Millennium Park. Every detail of their laughter, their movements, the way Noah was more reserved while Liam was quick to trust, it all played over and over in his mind. He had spent years building an empire, believing he had everything, but now he realized how incomplete his life had been. The next morning, he found himself staring at his reflection in the mirror of his high-rise apartment in downtown Chicago. His life had been all about power, control, and success, yet here he was, a man who had no idea how to be a father. He didn't even know what his sons liked to eat, what made them happy, or what scared them at night. The thought made him restless. He needed to see them again. That evening he called Margaret. She answered with a sigh, as if expecting his call. Daniel, this isn't easy for them, she said before he could even speak. I don't want them getting attached too quickly. I understand, he said, though the idea of being kept at a distance stung. But I want to be in their lives, Margaret. Even if it's just as a family friend for now. There was silence on the other end, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. Then she spoke. They have soccer practice on Saturday morning at Washington Park. If you want, you can come and watch. A surge of relief washed over him. Thank you, he said sincerely. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and a crisp autumn breeze. Daniel drove to Washington Park, his heart pounding as he parked near the soccer field. He spotted them immediately. Noah and Liam were in matching jerseys, running across the field with the other kids. They looked so natural, so full of energy, and for a moment he simply stood there watching them. Margaret was sitting on the sidelines with a thermos of coffee, her eyes on the game. As he approached, she glanced at him but said nothing. Instead, she motioned toward an empty spot on the bench beside her. "They're pretty good," Daniel said, watching as Liam kicked the ball with determination. "They love it," Margaret replied, her voice softer than before. "Isabella used to bring them here every Saturday." Daniel exhaled slowly. The weight of everything he had missed settled on his chest. "I should have been here," he admitted. Margaret turned to him, studying his face. "You didn't know." "But I should have," he said, his voice tight. "If I had just—" "Daniel," she interrupted gently. "Regret won't change anything. What matters is what you do now." He nodded, her words sinking in. He couldn't undo the past, but he could fight for his future with them. The game ended, and as the kids ran toward the sidelines, Liam spotted him first. His eyes lit up and he ran over. "Hey, you came." Daniel smiled, crouching down. "Of course. You guys were amazing out there." Noah walked over more slowly, eyeing him with quiet curiosity. "Did you ever play soccer?" Daniel hesitated before shaking his head. "No, but I wish I had." "You make it look fun." Liam grinned. "It is. Mom used to play with us at home." A pang of sadness hit Daniel, but he forced himself to smile. "She must have been good." "She was," Noah said, his voice carrying a hint of pride. Margaret cleared her throat. "Boys, we should get going." Liam frowned. "Can he come with us?" Daniel's heart skipped. He looked at Margaret, silently pleading for her approval. She hesitated, then sighed. "We're just getting lunch at Portillo's," she said. "If you want to come, I won't stop you." It wasn't much, but to Daniel it was everything. At Portillo's, the boys ordered hot dogs and cheese fries, and Daniel found himself listening intently to their stories about school, their favorite movies, and their funniest moments. Noah was clearly the more cautious one, observing Daniel between bites, while Liam was an open book, eager to share anything and everything. When their food arrived, Daniel watched as Liam drowned his fries in cheese, while Noah carefully arranged his food, eating methodically. It was fascinating to see their differences. "So what do you do?" Noah asked suddenly. Daniel hesitated, unsure how to explain his life in a way they'd understand. "I run a company," he said simply. "Like a boss?" Liam asked, eyes wide. Daniel chuckled. "Yeah, something like that." Noah tilted his head. "Then why do you want to hang out with us?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He glanced at Margaret, who was watching the exchange closely. "Because I think you're both really great kids," he said honestly. "And I'd like to get to know you better." Noah studied him for a moment, then gave a small nod as if accepting the answer. As they finished their meal, Liam suddenly reached across the table and held up his chocolate shake. "Cheers." Daniel hesitated before clinking his drink against Liam's, smiling as Noah rolled his eyes but joined in. It was a small moment, but to Daniel, it felt like the start of something real. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Daniel couldn't stop smiling as he drove home that evening. For the first time in his life he felt like something was changing inside him. The weight of loneliness that had followed him for years felt lighter, and he knew it was because of Noah and Liam. They had unknowingly filled a void in his life that he hadn't even realized was there. But as much as he enjoyed the small moments he had shared with them, he knew that earning their trust, especially Noah's, was going to take time. He wasn't just a stranger trying to be their friend. He was their father, and the truth of that was something he wasn't ready to tell them just yet. The thought of it terrified him. Would they hate him for not being there? Would they think he had abandoned them on purpose? He needed to tread carefully, and for now, just being around them was enough. The next few weeks became a routine. Daniel found excuses to visit, showing up at their soccer practices, offering to take them for ice cream, and even sitting through a school play that Liam had excitedly invited him to. Margaret was wary at first, but as she saw the boys growing more comfortable with Daniel's presence, she softened. She still kept a close watch, but she no longer had the same resistance in her eyes. Slowly, Daniel was becoming a part of their lives. But every time he looked at them, he felt a deep sadness for all the years he had missed. He found himself wondering what their first words had been, how Isabella had handled late-night feedings, what their favorite bedtime stories had been. He had missed everything: their first steps, their birthdays, their scraped knees, and the countless little moments that made up a childhood. And every time he thought about it, regret clawed at him. One afternoon, Daniel found himself sitting with Margaret at a coffee shop while the boys were at school. It was the first time they had been alone since their initial conversation. She stirred her coffee, watching him carefully. They like you, she said, breaking the silence. Daniel nodded, his fingers tightening around his cup. I like them too, he admitted. More than I ever thought possible. Margaret sighed. I'm still not sure how to feel about all of this. I've raised them their whole lives and now suddenly you're here. I know, Daniel said softly. And I don't want to take them away from you. I want to be part of their lives. Even if it's just as someone they can count on. Margaret looked away for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she took a deep breath. You should tell them, she said quietly. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Tell them what? You know what, she said, meeting his gaze. They deserve to know the truth. Daniel exhaled slowly. I don't know how. I don't want to hurt them. Margaret leaned forward, her voice firm but not unkind. Hiding the truth will hurt them more. Daniel knew she was right. He had been putting it off out of fear, but they had the right to know who he was. And even if they hated him for it, he couldn't keep pretending to be just a family friend. But when? And how? The opportunity came sooner than he expected. That weekend he took them to the Field Museum, where Liam excitedly dragged him through the exhibits, and Noah followed at a more measured pace, observing everything with quiet curiosity. They had just finished looking at the dinosaur fossils when Liam turned to him and asked, "Why don't you have kids?" The question caught Daniel off guard. He glanced at Noah, who was watching him intently, waiting for an answer. He took a deep breath. Actually, I do. Liam's eyes widened. Really? Where are they? Daniel hesitated, his heart pounding. This was it. You're looking at them, he said softly. There was a long silence. Noah's face remained unreadable, but Liam frowned in confusion. What do you mean? Daniel swallowed hard. I'm your father. Liam blinked. Like, our real dad? Yes, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know about you for a long time. But when I found out, I wanted to be here. I wanted to know you. Liam looked stunned, his little mind trying to process the revelation. But Noah's face darkened. He clenched his fists, his body tensing as he took a step back. You're lying, he said, his voice sharp. Daniel's chest ached. I'm not lying, Noah. I wish I had known sooner. I wish I had been there. Noah shook his head, his eyes filled with something that looked dangerously close to betrayal. You weren't there, he snapped. You weren't there for Mom. You weren't there for us. And now, you just show up and expect us to believe you? Liam looked between them, his excitement replaced by confusion. Noah. No, Noah said, his voice shaking. We don't need him. Daniel's throat tightened. Noah, I know I made mistakes. You don't know anything. Noah shouted, his eyes welling up with angry tears. You don't know what it was like. You don't know what Mom went through. You don't know how hard it was. He turned and ran, pushing past a group of museum visitors. Noah. Liam called after him. Daniel felt frozen, his heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. He had expected anger. He had expected confusion. But he hadn't expected this deep, raw pain. Margaret had been right, hiding the truth wouldn't have helped. But now that it was out, he didn't know how to fix the damage. Liam grabbed his hand, looking up at him with wide eyes. We have to find him, he said urgently. Daniel snapped out of his daze and nodded. Let's go. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. Daniel's heart pounded as he rushed through the crowded halls of the Field Museum, scanning the faces of tourists and families, desperate to catch a glimpse of Noah. Liam clung to his hand, his small fingers trembling. The boy's eyes were wide with panic, darting around the exhibits as they wove through the crowd. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He had known telling the truth would be difficult, but he hadn't expected Noah to run. The pain in his son's voice still echoed in his ears. The anger. The betrayal. He had spent years building his fortune, making deals, growing his empire, yet here he was, completely helpless when it came to the only thing that truly mattered. They reached the main entrance and Daniel turned to Liam, crouching to his level. Liam, think. Where would Noah go? His voice was calm, but inside he was drowning in fear. Liam bit his lip, his brows furrowed in thought. When he's mad, he likes to be alone. He doesn't like people looking at him when he's upset. He paused, then his eyes brightened. The gardens? Outside by the fountain. That's where he always hides when he's sad. Daniel didn't waste a second. He grabbed Liam's hand and ran toward the exit, his pulse pounding in his ears. As they stepped outside, the chilly Chicago air hit them, but Daniel barely noticed. His eyes darted around the vast museum grounds, past groups of visitors and street performers. Then he saw him. Noah was sitting on the edge of the fountain, his head buried in his arms, his small shoulders shaking. Daniel's chest tightened at the sight. The boy was so young, yet the weight he carried was too heavy for someone his age. Liam let go of Daniel's hand and ran ahead. "Noah," he called. Noah flinched but didn't look up. Liam climbed onto the fountain's edge and sat beside him. "You scared me," he said, nudging Noah's arm. "Why'd you run?" Noah sniffed, rubbing his face roughly before looking up. His eyes were red, his cheeks streaked with tears. When he saw Daniel approaching, his expression hardened again. "I don't want to talk," he muttered. Daniel slowed his steps, not wanting to push too hard. He had to be careful now. He had already lost too much time with them, he couldn't afford to lose any more. He crouched a few feet away, keeping his voice gentle. "Noah, I know you're angry. And you have every right to be. I won't force you to listen, but I want you to know that I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Noah's jaw clenched. He stared at the water, his fingers gripping the edge of the stone fountain. "You weren't there when we needed you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Mom cried so much. She worked so hard. She never talked about you, but I know you hurt her." Daniel felt like he had been punched in the gut. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he hadn't known, that he had never abandoned them on purpose. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was Noah's pain. He took a deep breath. "You're right," he admitted. "I wasn't there. And nothing I say can change that. But if I had known, I swear to you, I would have been there every single day." Noah's fingers tightened, his small body rigid. He wanted to believe him, Daniel could see it in his eyes. But the walls around his heart were high, built from years of disappointment. Liam shifted closer to his brother, his voice hesitant. "Noah, maybe he's telling the truth." Noah shook his head. "It doesn't change anything," he muttered. "Mom's gone." His voice cracked on the last word, and Daniel's own heart shattered. He took a deep breath. "I know it doesn't change the past. But I want to be here now. Not just for a few days. Forever." Noah finally looked at him, his eyes filled with a storm of emotions. "Why now?" he asked. "Why do you care all of a sudden?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I love you," he said simply. "I didn't know I had you, but the moment I found out, I couldn't think about anything else. I can't get back the years we lost, but I don't want to lose any more." The words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Liam looked from Daniel to Noah, his little face filled with hope. But Noah was still guarded. He wiped his face again, then let out a deep breath. "I don't know how to feel about this," he admitted. "It's too much." Daniel nodded. "I understand. Take your time. I'll wait." Noah hesitated, then finally gave a small nod. It wasn't acceptance, not yet. But it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, a fragile thread of possibility. And for now Daniel would take it. Liam let out a breath he had been holding and hopped off the fountain. "Can we go get ice cream now?" he asked, breaking the tension. Noah let out a small laugh, barely there, but Daniel caught it. "You always want ice cream," he muttered. Liam grinned. "Because it makes everything better." Daniel stood and held out a hand. "Come on," he said. "My treat." Noah hesitated again but slowly reached for Liam's hand. Together they walked toward the street, the weight between them a little lighter than before. It was a small step, but for Daniel it meant everything. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The drive back to Daniel's penthouse was filled with an odd silence. It wasn't the tense, suffocating silence from before, but something different. A silence that carried uncertainty, hesitation, and perhaps just a sliver of hope. Liam sat in the back, happily licking at his chocolate ice cream, completely oblivious to the emotional battlefield Noah and Daniel were navigating. Noah, on the other hand, sat stiffly, his half-eaten cone melting in his fingers. He stared out the window, his expression unreadable, his mind undoubtedly a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Daniel stole glances at him in the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight of his son wrestling with feelings he wasn't ready to express. The Chicago skyline loomed ahead, glittering against the early evening sky. Daniel had spent years conquering this city, making a name for himself in boardrooms and luxury hotels, yet he had never felt as unsure as he did now. He had always been a man who thrived on control, on knowing his next move, but with Noah, there was no roadmap, no strategy that could guarantee success. He could only hope that time and patience would help mend the damage of lost years. As they pulled into the underground parking of his high-rise building, Daniel turned in his seat. "I know this isn't easy," he said carefully, directing his words toward Noah. "But I want you to be comfortable here. If there's anything you need, anything that doesn't feel right, you tell me. Okay. Noah hesitated, then gave a small nod, though his expression remained guarded. Daniel took it as a victory, however small. They took the elevator up to the penthouse, and as the doors opened, the boys stepped into a world vastly different from the one they had known. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, and the sleek, modern decor was a stark contrast to the tiny apartment they had lived in with their mother. Liam, eyes wide with wonder, immediately ran to the window, pressing his hands against the glass. "Whoa! We're so high up," he exclaimed. Noah, however, lingered near the entrance, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's big," he muttered. Daniel walked toward him, sensing his unease. "If it doesn't feel like home, we can change things. Decorate however you want," he offered. "This place is yours just as much as it is mine." Noah scoffed lightly. "I don't need anything." Daniel sighed, running a hand through his hair. He knew he couldn't force Noah to accept this new life overnight. It would take time. "All right," he said gently. "But if you ever change your mind, just say the word." Liam, meanwhile, had already made himself at home, flopping onto the massive couch with a content sigh. "This place is way cooler than our old apartment," he admitted, grinning. Noah shot him a glare, but it lacked real anger. Instead, there was something else, conflicted guilt. Daniel could see it in his eyes. Noah didn't want to enjoy this place, didn't want to feel like he was betraying their mother by accepting anything from the man who had unknowingly been absent their entire lives. Daniel sat on the couch across from them, deciding to give them space to adjust. He leaned back, watching as Liam happily explored the penthouse, while Noah remained hesitant, like he was afraid to let his guard down. "How about some dinner?" Daniel suggested after a while. "You guys can pick whatever you want." Liam lit up. "Pizza," he declared. Daniel chuckled. "Pizza it is." He glanced at Noah, silently offering him a chance to object, but the boy just shrugged. It wasn't agreement, but it wasn't rejection either. While they waited for the food, Daniel did his best to make conversation. Liam, ever the energetic one, had no problem filling the silence, asking about everything from Daniel's work to whether they could have a dog. Noah, on the other hand, remained quiet, only responding when absolutely necessary. Daniel let it be, knowing pushing too hard would only make things worse. When the pizza finally arrived, they ate in relative peace. Noah didn't talk much, but he didn't push his plate away either, which Daniel took as a small win. Liam, however, was full of questions, his curiosity unfiltered. "So, you're really rich, huh?" he asked between bites. Daniel chuckled, setting down his slice. "I guess you could say that." Liam's eyes widened. "Like how rich?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how to answer. He had spent years being cautious about discussing his wealth, knowing how people treated him differently because of it. But this was different. These were his sons. "Enough to make sure you and Noah never have to worry about anything," he said simply. Liam grinned. "Cool. Do you have a pool?" Daniel nodded. "On the rooftop." Liam practically bounced in his seat. "Can we see it?" Daniel glanced at Noah, who still hadn't said much, then nodded. "Sure. Let's go." They made their way up to the rooftop, where the heated pool sparkled under the city lights. Liam ran to the edge, staring at the water in awe. "This is awesome." Daniel smiled, but his gaze drifted to Noah, who stood back, his arms still crossed. "Noah," he said gently, "you don't have to like me. You don't have to trust me right away. But I just want you to know that I'm trying." Noah stared at the water for a long moment before finally speaking. "It's not that simple," he muttered. "Mom never told us anything about you. And now you're here, acting like everything can just change." He turned, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't work that way." Daniel nodded, accepting his words. "I know," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere." Noah held his gaze for a moment, then finally, slowly turned back toward the pool. He didn't say anything else, but he didn't leave either. It wasn't much. But to Daniel, it was enough to give him hope. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The days that followed were filled with slow, cautious adjustments. Liam had no trouble settling into the new life, embracing every luxury with childlike excitement. He ran through the penthouse, exploring every room, asked endless questions about Daniel's life, and even picked out a room for himself without hesitation. Noah, however, remained distant. He avoided conversations whenever possible, answering in short, clipped responses when spoken to. He refused any gifts, rejecting the new clothes Daniel had bought, and instead continued wearing the few belongings he had brought with him. Daniel knew pushing him wouldn't help, so he gave him space, hoping that in time, Noah would begin to see that he wasn't the enemy. One evening, Daniel stood in his home office, staring out at the Chicago skyline as the sun set behind the buildings. His mind was restless, replaying every interaction with Noah, wondering if he was doing enough, or if he was failing the boy in ways he couldn't yet understand. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. He turned to see Maria, his longtime housekeeper, standing at the entrance. She had been with him for years, and though he rarely allowed people into his personal life, Maria was one of the few he trusted. "Sir, I thought you should know," Maria said hesitantly. "Noah hasn't eaten dinner tonight. He told me he wasn't hungry, but—" She paused, concern evident in her eyes. "I don't think that's the case." Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. "Thank you, Maria. I'll talk to him." He made his way down the hall, stopping in front of Noah's closed door. He knocked lightly before pushing it open. The boy was sitting on the bed, his back against the headboard, staring at nothing in particular. "You didn't eat," Daniel said, stepping inside. Noah shrugged, not looking at him. "Wasn't hungry." Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining some distance. "Noah, I know this isn't easy for you, but starving yourself won't change anything." Noah finally turned his head, his expression unreadable. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice tinged with resentment. "You didn't care for 12 years. Daniel exhaled, knowing this conversation was bound to happen eventually. "I didn't know about you," he said honestly. "If I had, I would have been there. I would have done everything I could for you and Liam." Noah scoffed. "Yeah, sure. You expect me to believe that?" Daniel met his gaze, unwavering. "Yes, because it's the truth." He leaned forward slightly. "I can't change the past, Noah, but I can be here now, if you let me." For a moment, Noah didn't say anything. His fingers tightened around the blanket, his jaw clenched. Then quietly he asked, "Did you love her?" Daniel felt his chest tighten at the unexpected question. He didn't need to ask who Noah was referring to. "I did," he admitted. "More than anything." Noah looked away, his face unreadable. "Then why did she leave?" Daniel hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "There were things I didn't know. Things I should have seen but I didn't. I made mistakes, Noah. But I never stopped loving your mother." Noah was silent for a long time before he finally spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "She cried at night sometimes. I never knew why." Daniel's heart clenched at the thought of Grace suffering in silence, carrying burdens she had never shared with him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I wish I could have been there for her. For you." Noah swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. He quickly blinked them away and turned his face toward the window. "I'm still not hungry," he muttered. Daniel nodded, not wanting to push him. "All right. But if you change your mind, there's food in the kitchen." He stood up, pausing at the door. "Good night, Noah." Noah didn't respond, but Daniel didn't expect him to. He knew trust wouldn't be built overnight. But tonight, for the first time, he felt like he had taken a small step forward. The next morning, Daniel woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. He threw on a robe and made his way downstairs, pausing at the entrance. To his surprise, Liam and Noah were sitting at the kitchen island eating breakfast. Maria was cooking, a warm smile on her face. "You finally decided to eat," Daniel noted, walking in. Noah stiffened slightly but didn't look away from his plate. "Maria wouldn't stop nagging," he muttered. Maria chuckled. "A growing boy needs food. You can be stubborn all you want, but you won't do it on an empty stomach under my watch." Liam grinned, his mouth full of pancakes. "These are so good," he exclaimed. "Maria, can we have pancakes every day?" Maria laughed. "Only if you promise to clean your plate." Liam eagerly nodded, already reaching for another. Daniel took a seat across from Noah, watching him carefully. The boy still wasn't entirely comfortable, but at least he was eating. That was progress. "So," Daniel said casually, "I was thinking we could go out today. Maybe to the museum or the park. Whatever you guys want." Liam's eyes lit up. "Can we go to Navy Pier? I saw a Ferris wheel on TV and it looked awesome." Daniel smiled. "Navy Pier it is." He looked at Noah. "What about you?" Noah hesitated, then shrugged. "Whatever." Daniel knew that was the best response he would get for now. "All right then. We'll leave in an hour." The trip to Navy Pier was a mix of excitement and quiet observation. Liam was thrilled, dragging Daniel from one attraction to another, laughing as they rode the Ferris wheel, his face lighting up with joy. Noah, however, kept his distance, walking a few steps behind them, watching but never fully engaging. At one point they stopped at an ice cream stand. Liam eagerly picked out a flavor, but when Daniel turned to Noah, the boy hesitated. "I don't need anything," he said. Daniel handed him a cone anyway. "It's just ice cream, Noah." Noah stared at it for a moment before finally taking it. He didn't say thank you, but he didn't refuse it either. Another small step. As they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Liam chatting happily between bites, Daniel turned to Noah. "You don't have to like me," he said softly. "But I hope one day you won't hate me either." Noah didn't respond, but after a long pause he took another bite of his ice cream. Daniel watched him, hope flickering in his chest. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The weeks that followed were filled with a delicate balance between progress and resistance. Liam adjusted to his new life with ease, embracing the luxuries and opportunities that came with being the son of a millionaire. He loved going to school in a private car, enjoyed the attention from his classmates when they found out who his father was, and spent hours exploring every inch of the penthouse. He was curious about Daniel's business, often asking questions about how things worked, and even declared that he wanted to be a CEO one day. But Noah remained distant. He avoided conversations unless necessary and never asked for anything. He still refused to call Daniel Dad, and though he no longer outright rejected his presence, there was always a wall between them. One evening, Daniel sat in his office reviewing a contract when Maria knocked on the door. "Sir, there's something you should see," she said hesitantly. "It's about Noah." Daniel put down his papers, immediately concerned. Maria led him to the security room, where the screen displayed the feed from the front entrance. Noah was outside, sitting on the steps with a small backpack. The security guard stood nearby, talking to him, but Noah barely responded. Daniel didn't hesitate. He rushed downstairs and pushed open the door. "Noah?" he called, his voice firm but not angry. "Where are you going?" Noah didn't look up. "I don't belong here," he muttered. "Liam loves it, but this isn't my life. I don't need all this." Daniel sighed, sitting beside him. "You don't have to love it, Noah. But running away isn't the answer." Noah clenched his jaw. "I wasn't running away. I was just leaving." Daniel looked at him carefully. "Where would you go?" Noah hesitated, gripping the straps of his backpack. "I don't know. Back to the shelter, maybe?" Daniel exhaled slowly. "Noah, I know you don't trust me yet, and I understand why. But you're my son. You and Liam both. I'm not going to let you go back to the streets." Noah shook his head. "I don't need your money. I don't need this life." "It's not about money," Daniel said quietly. "It's about family. You don't have to take anything from me, Noah. But you deserve a home. You deserve stability." Noah's hands tightened into fists. "Mom never had that. She struggled every single day. And you were here, living in this luxury while she suffered." Daniel's chest ached at the accusation. "I would have helped her if I had known," he said, his voice thick with regret. "I can't change the past, Noah. But I can be here now." Noah finally looked up, his eyes filled with frustration and something deeper, pain, maybe even longing. "And what happens when you get tired of us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "When you decide we're too much trouble?" Daniel's heart clenched. "That won't happen," he said firmly. "I promise you, Noah. I'm not leaving. No matter how long it takes for you to believe that, I'll be here." Noah stared at him for a long moment before looking away. "I don't know if I believe you," he admitted. Daniel nodded. "That's okay. Just give it time." Noah didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Slowly he stood up, hesitating before finally stepping back inside. Daniel followed, a small flicker of hope growing in his chest. Later that night, as Daniel sat in the living room, Liam ran in excitedly. "Dad. Noah said he'll play basketball with me tomorrow." Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Did he?" Liam nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah. I've been asking him for days, but he always said no. But tonight he finally said yes." A small smile tugged at Daniel's lips. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. "That's great, buddy." Liam grinned. "Maybe he's finally starting to like it here." Daniel hoped so. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time he felt like there was a chance that Noah might let him in. And for now that was enough. Before going to next, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends. The days slowly turned into weeks, and though Noah was still guarded, something had shifted. He no longer flinched at Daniel's presence, and while he wasn't ready to call him Dad, he had stopped pushing him away completely. Liam, on the other hand, had fully embraced his new life. He was eager to be a part of Daniel's world, asking questions about his business, his childhood, and even his cars. But despite the progress, there was still something missing: Noah's full acceptance. Daniel knew he couldn't rush it, but he hoped that, in time, his son would see that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, Daniel decided to take the boys out to dinner at a small diner in downtown Chicago. It wasn't the kind of upscale restaurant he usually frequented, but he wanted to go somewhere that felt familiar, comfortable. The boys sat across from him, Liam excitedly flipping through the menu, while Noah remained quiet, absently stirring his water with a straw. The waitress, a kind-looking woman in her 50s, approached with a warm smile. "What can I get you boys?" she asked. Liam eagerly placed his order, listing off his choices like he had never been allowed to order freely before. Noah, after a moment of hesitation, finally chose a simple burger and fries. When Daniel placed his own order, the waitress paused, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You look familiar," she said. Daniel smiled politely. "I get that sometimes." She tilted her head as if trying to place him. "Wait a minute, you're Daniel Whitmore, aren't you?" Daniel tensed slightly but nodded. "Yes, I am." Her expression softened. "I read about you in the news a while back, about the twins, your wife. I'm sorry for your loss." Daniel glanced at his sons, feeling an odd sense of exposure. "Thank you," he said quietly. The waitress hesitated before speaking again. I think I might have met your wife once. A few years ago she used to come in here sometimes, always with the boys. She was a good woman." Daniel's throat tightened. He had learned bits and pieces about Emma's struggles over the past months, but hearing this, knowing she had brought their sons to this very diner, made it feel more real. "She was," he murmured. After the waitress left, Liam turned to him, eyes bright. "Mom used to bring us here?" Noah, for the first time that night, looked directly at Daniel. "I remember," he said quietly. "She liked the milkshakes here." Daniel swallowed hard, his heart aching for all the moments he had missed. "I wish I had known," he admitted. "I wish I had been there." Noah studied him for a long moment, then looked away. "It doesn't change anything," he muttered. Daniel sighed, but before he could say anything, Liam suddenly grinned. "Hey, let's order a milkshake. For Mom." Noah hesitated, but after a moment he gave a small nod. "Yeah. Okay." Daniel signaled the waitress, ordering a vanilla milkshake, Emma's favorite, according to what he had learned. When it arrived, Liam took the first sip, then passed it to Noah. Noah hesitated for a second, then took a small sip. Finally he slid it toward Daniel. Daniel wrapped his hand around the glass, feeling the weight of the moment. He took a sip, the cold sweetness mixing with the warmth in his chest. "To Emma?" he said softly. Liam grinned. "To Mom." Noah, quieter but not hesitant, whispered, "To Mom." The drive home was quiet but comfortable. When they arrived, Noah surprised Daniel by pausing at the door. "Thanks," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Daniel looked at him, sensing that this was more than just gratitude for dinner. It was something deeper, something unspoken. "Anytime," he replied, meaning it. Over the next few weeks things changed. Noah didn't become overly affectionate, but he stopped resisting. He let Daniel help him with homework, let him teach him how to drive, even accepted small gestures of care without pulling away. One evening as they sat watching TV, Liam dozed off on the couch, his head resting on Daniel's shoulder. Noah sat on the other end, arms crossed, staring at the screen. After a while he spoke. "You're not so bad," he admitted. Daniel turned his head slightly. "No." Noah sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, I still don't fully trust you. But I guess you're trying." Daniel smiled, knowing this was as close to acceptance as he would get for now. "I am," he said. "And I always will." Noah didn't respond, but he didn't move away either. It was enough. Months later, as they stood by Emma's grave on a bright spring morning, Daniel placed a hand on both boys' shoulders. "She would be proud of you both," he said softly. Liam smiled, but Noah remained quiet. After a long moment he exhaled. "I think she'd be proud of you too," he said. Daniel's heart swelled. He turned to look at his son, meeting his gaze. For the first time Noah didn't look away. And in that moment Daniel knew, they were finally a family. If you've lived this story, please subscribe our channel, like and share with friends.